Hello everyone. In this short video, I'm going to talk about the second step in policy analysis, which is going to assemble or gather some evidence to refine our problem. So we talked about the first step, define the problem, right? But the problem you define may not be that perfect at the first place. Recall this, right? It's an iterative process. So with the process, you understand the policy, the background, the situation more, then you probably want to think, oh, I may twist a bit about my problem, or I needed to gather more data. I needed to talk to someone to get first-hand information so that I can come up with a better defined problem. Right, so that's why you need the second step. You need to gather more evidence to refine your problem. But before you actually go directly to collect the evidence, you need to think about it, right? So think before collect. Otherwise, you don't know what kind of information or evidence you need. All right, so the first good starting point is always review the available literature, right? So how about the others talking about the similar issue that you are interested in? And you can survey the best practices, even the best practices from other fields. So for instance, if you are interested in education, now somehow people working in urban design or management, they may have the best practice that suits your situation perfectly. Then you can use that, right? So this is the same idea, use analogies. And of course, you need to start earlier and touch base again. You need to gain credibility and broker consensus and free the captive mind, which means some out-of-box thinking, right? As I said, you may find the best practice actually is in other field, not to be bounded by education if you are interested in education. So think before collecting data. The purpose is, of course, to assess the nature and extent of the problems. So when we talk about then the severe problem, for instance, then too many poor people need help in the poverty alleviation area. But we really needed to be a little bit more specific, right? So when we say too many, like how many people are we talking about? Why we define too many poor people, right? So how we define this? Is this because of resource availability? Then too many people are underserved, so that poor people don't get sufficient resources. Or is this because of something else, right? Is this because of health issues, so that they can't be competitive in the job market because their nutrition level is so low? Or is this because of education problem, right? They don't have the right or necessary skills to be competitive on the job market, etc. Or is this because of government failure, because the government is just not functioning and can't help build the base for a growing economy, right? Something like that. So we really need to think about before collecting, right? You need to think about the value of evidence and the utility of an educated guess. We define this as guesstimation. So this is especially true when you're facing a problem. There's so many uncertainty in the future, but you need to somehow make a prediction, right? So the reasonable way to do this is based on the previous records and the data and the evidence. Make an educated guess, which is a guesstimation. So this is called a practical guesstimation. Is very practical, right? Many of the government agencies do, and many scholars, when they are making predictions, they do so as well. So before thinking, before collecting, you need to write a memo to yourself, right? Write down all the models of politics and theories that can guide the process of collecting evidence. Now we talked about the models, right? So you have policy process models, which basically what we are doing right now. We break down into different steps, and this is based on the rationalism, right? But also you have like a group series, you have elitism, which means all the policies made by elites, and the rest of people just follow whatever the elites say, right? And also maybe public choice theory, because they assume that all the politicians they care about their self-interest rather than the public interest, right? So anything they may benefit them personal interest, they may move toward that direction, right? So that have theoretical and practical implications for public policy. And also you have different theories about market failure, social failure, or government failure. Why we care about this is because after you define the problem, or even during the process of you define the problem, right, you need to really understand the cause from where, right? Is this more in the government side, or is this because of the market not functioning, or is this because of the social foundation not there? This also leads you to come up with different policy alternatives that can solve the problem, right? So if you define this in the wrong place, then probably you are going to come up with the wrong solution, which actually cannot help and often worse the problem. Right, so market failure, you have many problems related to market failure, right? Because of free riders, right? If you can't exclude those free riders by defining or protecting the property rights, then soon it will be the tragedy of commons, right? And also you have to deal with the externality issues. Some private actions will have strong either positive or negative externalities, right? So one of the common example is pollution, right? So one company, they make goods, may satisfy a group of people on the market, but simultaneously they may hurt the environment. So if they are polluting the area, who's gonna responsible for the cost of pollution, right? So this is called externality. And also you probably heard about the theory about lemon markets, right? So this is the information, the asymmetry between the seller and the buyer. And usually the car dealers, right, try to sell you a car, the second-hand or even third-hand car, but the seller may hold more information than the buyer, right, than you if you want to purchase one. So that could result in people use lemon cards to pretend to be a good car, right? Try to sell it to you. So you predicted that then eventually there will be no good cars on the market because people will predict they're all lemons. All right, so this is information asymmetry. And also you have like social failure issues related to like broken family relationship, social inequality, discrimination. This is especially true, right, between the majority and the minority. And the government failure related to, if we follow the voting rule, the majority rules, then may or may not undermine the minority rights. And you also have strong lobbying firms. They represent different kinds of interest groups, which may not totally benefit the public. Right? So also, the government is regarded as inefficient body because there are so many red tapes, and if they are dealing with citizens, serve the clients, and clients and citizens, they may perceive an administrative burden which may distance them from government service, and government can also result in failure, right? So, but all these theories will help you to think about, like, before you collecting any information and the evidence. Why? Because this is important, right? So you want to solve which side of the problem, and also remember this: you can't solve all the problems simultaneously, right? This is just practically impossible. All right. So also, when you think about collecting evidence, you need to think about like, are we going to use secondary data or primary data? Primary data, which means you are going to collect all by yourself. Secondary data may be already available, right? You can use them. And we collect evidence because we want to come up with a definition of the problems that are based on these evidence. Right, so you really need to think about the value of your evidence, right? So don't collect the evidence that you are not going to use in the future, all right? And the utility of an educated guess, as I already said, we define this as guesstimation, right? Especially when you think about rationalism, incrementalism, say government needed to subsidy industry, but how many dollars are we talking about here, right? So we probably need to guesstimate it based on the previous data, right? So maybe, over the past 20 years, each year there's a 5% increment, then probably you need to project this 5% project. Then during the pandemic, right, then you probably need to add a little bit more, right? So that's called a guesstimation. It doesn't from nowhere, right? It's not from nowhere. It's based on the previous data. And also, how can you find the literature to review? Google Scholar is always a good starting point. And for policy analysis, we usually have some good think tanks here that you can look for, right? Brookings Institute, Rand Corporation, Urban Institute. They are highly respected in the policy analysis field. So other kind of evidence, as we said, you can survey the best practice, use analogies, use best practice, right? But from the other area. So this is also very important because sometimes you have to have the out-of-box thinking, right? You cannot just be bounded by one particular area. A great economist, Alfred Marshall, once said, if economist is only an economist, it's not a good economist, which means an economist, if he wants to be a great one, he also needs to be a historian, statistician, and even read some literature. So this is we call out-of-box thinking. Okay. Now, since some practical considerations for assembling evidence. First, you need to locate the relevant sources, right? And then you need to gaining and maintaining access to these sources. And also accumulating background information. And then, of course, you need to protecting the political credibility, right? You can't say, okay, you are too biased and then you destroy your reputation and people will not trust you. So if you are collecting primary data and you are interviewing people, they are not going to give you the true information that you needed. All right, so for locating the relevant resources, right? So now that involves both, right? Credible documents and credible informants or people. So when you are seeking second-hand information, now this you need to know where you can find it, right? And of course, sometimes we would encourage, especially in our public administration, nonprofit management field people, just to go to the field, talk to people, right? Gather some first-hand information. That's gonna help you a lot because the second-hand information, sometimes they are out of date, and sometimes they are not as accurate as first-hand information, right? So if you're really going to, gaining and maintaining access to sources, especially we are talking about people or people hold access to some credible documents, then you need to get an appointment, cultivating access, exhausting access, right? And so one way, very common in policy analysis, is you are going to conduct a policy research interview, right? So you are going to interview people. So how can you do that? Now, first, you need to energize and steering the conversation, right? So you need to have your question in your mind so that you know which which direction you want the conversation go. And you need to leverage the defensive informant. So especially if they are not giving you the answers that you wanted, or you think they are hiding from something, then you need to use some techniques, right? Try to really tease out the true answers that will help you to define your problem. And using language to characterize and calibrate. Now, of course, this needs a lot of practical skills. And protecting credibility. Now, first, we are talking about defending against political inspired criticism, right? So don't be like, too polarized or bounded by partisan, right? Usually a good definition of a problem usually will involve a bipartisan solution. Right? And you also need to preparing for the premature exposure. You don't want to too quickly review your premature ideas, right? Because you are really at a stage of refining your problem, so it's not that easy. You quickly release all your solutions. So this is probably not a good idea to do so at that stage. All right, so here, let me give you an example. All right, so this policy analyst was asked to do a study, all right, a study about a coal industry. So the coal industry is particularly defined. This is called Wichita-Hiscock bituminous coal industry. All right, so they wanted to think about this industry's future. Is this pretty bad or pretty good, right? If it's pretty bad, right, so then the results probably can be used to justify some sort of government subsidy, right? Because you want to keep all the workers there. So government needed to subsidize the industry, right? If the future is pretty bad. Now, if the future is actually bright, right, it's good. Then the results might be used for promotional purpose, right, by the industry itself. Say, oh, we are good. Now we are in a good position, right? So you possibly may create more jobs, and then you can recruit people and joining the industry. All right, so let's think about this, right? So if this is talking about government subsidy, so we probably are talking about incrementalism, right? And of course, this is also related to interest group theory. Now, for incrementalism, right? So if this then the trend that government are going to subsidize the industry for over years, so each year there will be an increment. So we guesstimate it, right? So we use guesstimation. Now, if it's later, right? So the industry itself or the local merchants or somehow the association, coal mining industry association, they are going to promote the bright future of the industry, right? So, but we look deeper, then the more evidence, right, to show there might be some issues related to the industry. Now, first is that there's a lot of miners' strike a few years ago. So you need to figure out why, right? Is this because of bad management, or is this because of wages too low, right? So this, of course, strike usually lead by miners' union, right? So if you have a labor union and you have the industry, then you have two interest groups. So they are going to compete with each other in a sense. Now, most of the time, if the future is quite bright, right, they probably have less tense relationship between the two groups. However, if then the civilian issue like related to a very bad situation in the near future, which means less resources, right? So if the industry, the owners take more, then obviously the miners' interest will be hurt. So if the miners want to protect them interest, they need to use the unions first to argue. So if then the negotiation won't work, then they probably go to strike, right? Fight for themselves. All right, so there's also many things, right? So the future may depend on market demand, but if the market is declining because of substitute fuels, then even you seeking government subsidy, it probably won't last long, right? Because people are shifting to other fuels, or maybe is if the future is pretty bad, is this because of the high production costs? It could be like you are not utilizing the more advanced coal mining technology, right? But why? We really need to dig deeper. So it's probably good to talk to someone working in the front line. Or is this because of transportation, right? Because of the railroads? If the railroads are sick, then the coal industry can't be well, right? Because you depend on the railroads to transport your coals to some other places in need. Or the coal industry itself is good, but just because of this particular bituminous coal, okay, so this is probably not a good industry so far. Or the coal industry is good, but the company, which are HISSIC, has a problem, right? So then you need to define it. So it shows you where you can actually find the data to define your problem, right? So you can look at, for the first one, if this is because of bituminous coal, then you probably can check the Trade Association of coal mining companies data. Then really look at this particular coal. Is this the problem? Or you can maybe look at the if this is a company's problem, right? The which are HISSIC's problem, then you probably need to check this area, right? So you can check the Bureau of Labor Statistics for unemployment figures there, right? So that particular area, which are HISSIC, may have a problem with overall unemployment. It's probably not because of the coal industry. And also, the coal industry may cause some environmental issues, right? A lot of smoke, nasty carbon footprints, which means harm on the environment. But if that's the problem, right? If that's the problem, when can you find the data? Maybe Sierra Club, which is a nonprofit advocating for protecting environment, right? Maybe they can offer you useful data on these questions. All right, so really now we are talking about before you collecting evidence, you really needed to think about it, right? So think like writing a memo, right? Different directions, and force yourself to narrow down to the true cause of the problem. All right. Thank you very much. That will be all for this short video.